She talked, and he listened. She remembered one stretch of silence after she'd been spilling out her fretful confusion about some mortal crisis or another. He nodded very slightly for most of a minute and turned to look at her. "Sweetheart," he said, "when will you pay more attention to wanting what you have than having what you want?" They sat on the veranda holding hands, silently measuring the life he'd lived by what he'd just said, and watching the small waves collapse gently on the beach until the sky went dark. Not long ago she described that memory and the feelings it stirred to her women's group. "All right, then," said Gretchen, 10 years older than Caroline and her closest friend in the group. "Are you open to feedback on that?" Caroline nodded that she was. "Really?" asked Gretchen. "Are you, in fact?" Caroline nodded again, puzzled. "Of course I am." "Well, of course you are, but how many bloody times have we gone over this, you and me?" Gretchen said. "So don't just nod at me like a zombie. Think about it and tell me, are you really open to feedback?" "Gretchen, enough. I am really listening, okay?" Gretchen got up from her chair and walked across the circle to sit at Caroline's feet. She took her friend's hand in hers and looked Caroline in the eye. "There are 2 things you have to do," she began quietly. "The first is give yourself a bloody break. You don't think anything you do, no matter how astonishing, is good enough. What you sold to the mayor last month, after half the non-profits in town had been working on him for years, and all you could talk about afterwards were the mistakes you made? You are hands down the most accomplished and competent woman in this room, and listening to you, I swear you think you're the least, and it's driving us all bloody crazy." The other women stirred with agreement, and a trace of laughter. Caroline smiled too, and nodded her head. "That's the Joe gene," she said. "I've told you about the Joe gene, haven't I?" "No," the women murmured, she hadn't. Caroline went on to define the Joe gene as the one that makes it impossible to believe that you're doing enough, that you are enough. Linda, sitting to Gretchen's right, asked if the Josephine gene wouldn't be more like it, since it's women who have that doubt pounded into them. Caroline admitted that she herself had it, but so had her brother. The 2 of them decided it was invented by their Grandpa Joe, who had planted it pretty much equally in their father and all their aunts and uncles. The Joe gene reminds you that everything you do falls short, and your job is to figure out why so you can do it better next time, when, of course, you'll fall short again, and you have to learn from it for the next time, when, guess what, it's just not quite good enough. A Latina named Monique spoke from across the room. "If you set out to invent a formula to make life hard to appreciate, could you do better than that? How about if you start judging yourself by standards that are somewhere in the same galaxy as how you judge us?" She held her hands out to include the circle. "And see what that does." Caroline went on to describe watching her parents struggle, especially her mother, who must have picked up the Joe gene by osmosis or something. Caroline could actually remember a moment as a teenager when she solemnly swore she wouldn't carry her mother's dissatisfaction to adulthood. "Little did I know," she said lightly, "the power of the Joe gene." Gretchen got up and returned to her seat. She stared at Caroline for a moment. "Well, it's a bloody bore," she said without a trace of humor, "and it's time you broke the cycle before you pass it on to your poor, lovely children." "It may be too late for that," said Linda, whose daughters played with Caroline's. "You said there were 2 things," Caroline said to Gretchen. "What's the other?" "Did you hear me on the first one? Are you going to deal with your gene?" The last word came out like acid, warning Caroline none of this was a joke. "Yes," said Caroline. "What's the second?" Gretchen's face softened. "It's to notice," she said. "Whenever anything happens in this town that feels good to you, I don't care what it is, I want you to notice. If you keep doing that, I promise, one day you'll discover that living here is so delicious you can't stand it. I know you want me to make it more complicated than that, dear sister, but I'm afraid I can't. Just bloody notice."